Oh, there we go. Sorry, the sound wasn't working. Can you hear me now? Good.
Yep.
I may go off camera for just a few minutes until Commissioner Griffin arrives.
Hello, hello, everyone.
Howdy.
Hello, Griffin.
Hello. Excuse my tardiness. I was coming from another work meeting, but I'm glad I was able to make it. Good to see everybody's faces on this Tuesday. I have to remind myself it's Tuesday.
Monday with the Martin Luther King holiday.
I know. I'd love to hear like what some folks did for MLK Day. If you could put it in the chat, or if anybody wants to give a voiceover, like how did you spend your Martin Luther King Jr. holiday before we get started today?
I won't say sort of all the things I did, but one of the things that I'll highlight is I did have the opportunity to be in person witnessing the swearing in of our new comptroller, Brooke Learman, which was a wonderful event, and specifically call that in reference some of the goals, aspirations, work of Martin Luther King. I also actually, I guess this was prior to MLK Day, but I did hear our own Dr. Tracy Durant give a keynote address on Sunday, which was at the People's Lutheran Church, and Commissioner Chinia had sort of shared out about it. But it was wonderful to hear Dr. Durant speak about MLK as well. So those are two things this weekend, specifically referencing Martin Luther King.
That is amazing. Oh, I love that. And congratulations to Comptroller Learman. Extremely excited for her and proud of her and all of the things that I know she'll be able to do in that position. And our very own Dr. Durant. I can only imagine that speech had to be dynamic, because Dr. Durant is dynamic. So thank you for sharing, Commissioner Coy. And I saw some folks spent time with their family. I see that in chat. Commissioner Sally spent time with family. Your dad grew up in VA. I definitely spent some time reflecting. I think it's always good to have some time to reflect on, where are we in this dream? And what's our part in it, right? It's not just a day off. It's definitely a day to think and to be very present in understanding all that Dr. King stood for and all of the people that he worked with in the movement and what they stood for, and how we're still fighting for some of those things today, and how important it is that we stay grounded in understanding what we're working towards. So thanks, everyone. Hey, Commissioner Quinn.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Hi.
Yes, we are just getting started. And just so everybody knows, we have moved our time to 4 p.m. to make sure that we always have Commissioner Quinn's voice in the space. We want to make sure that we are being equitable in how we schedule our meetings for our student commissioners. And this was one of the changes that we made, and I'm glad that we were able to make it. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And we have a few things for board and staff discussion today. Well, two things in general. The first presentation is around policy JJA. This is a framing discussion for student organizations and incorporating student governance and student rights and responsibilities. So if we have our presenters here, we are ready for you.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, commissioners. It's lovely to see all of you, and happy belated MLK Day. I'm Sarah Warren. I'm the Executive Director for Whole Child Services and Support. And on screen here with me, you can see one of my many colleagues who's working on this. Haley, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm Haley Tilt, and I'm a youth engagement specialist in the Office of Engagement. And until this year, I was a city schools teacher. So happy to still be on the team, but in a new capacity.
Thanks, Haley. And also with us, I believe we have Danny Byerson and possibly Chris Battaglia. Also, Danny, are you here with us?
I am, and I do apologize I'm not on camera just yet because I was just out of school, but their day wrapped up, so everybody was heading out. So I'm in between, I was bouncing between schools today. But hello again, everyone. I am Danny Byerson. I'm the educational specialist for extracurricular programming out of the Whole Child office. And once I'm stationary, I will be on camera.
And Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Battaglia. I am the Director of Community Engagement. Much like Haley, I am coming from the schoolhouse in that I was a principal at Benjamin Franklin High School for the past 11 years.
So these are all key members of the work group that we have now working on this project, as well as we've got a couple of folks from the legal team. I don't know if they're on here right now, but if you want to show your faces and wave, that would be lovely too. Darian and Rebecca are really critical members of our team. We've got a principal that's been working closely with us, Dr. Mosley, who's not here with us today because he's busy running his school. And then we've had a great advantage of having a number of students working with us. And Haley, you're gonna have to guide me here as to how many and who we've got on the call.
Yes. So we have two members of ASCBC who've been collaborating on the JJA process. So I'll let Yasmin and Grant both introduce themselves and their role in ASCBC.
Hi, my name is Yasmin Blanchard. I'm the Vice President of the Associate Student Congress of Baltimore City, and prior to becoming Vice President, I served as the LGBTQ liaison for the past 2 years. I am also affiliated with Baltimore Polytechnic's Gender and Sexuality Alliance. Thank you for having me.
Hello, my name is Grant Travis. I'm in the 12th grade and at Port View at Digital Harbor, and I am an ad hoc member for the ASCBC.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. So as you can see, this is a team effort. There are several of us here. While you will only hear a few of our voices during the rest of the presentation, we wanted you to know there are a lot of other people in the background. And as you stated at the beginning, this is just a framing conversation. So what you won't see here are actual changes to the policy yet. What you will see is how we're approaching this process. And we would love to, open up a conversation with you about how we're thinking about this process and any suggestions that you may have for us about things we should be considering or other approaches we ought to be taking would be really helpful. So with that, because it involves student organizations and student rights and responsibilities, it touches on most of the board priorities. So priorities 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7 we've called out here. Oops. Right. So just by way of context, policy JJA, so this is the Student Organizations Policy, and its one associated regulation, JJARA, are up for review this year. But there's been discussion of this ongoing now for some time, and a lot of what landed us here is a great conversation that took place in January of last year, led by Chief Hike Hubbard with this committee. And so part of what came out of that, and we'll talk in more detail about this, but part of what came out of that presentation and framing conversation was a recommendation by the committee that we integrate issues related to student government into our JJARA revision. So rather than having a whole separate policy on student government, it will be addressed here in this policy. In addition, while we are undertaking this process, we also have a critical need to create district-wide rights and responsibilities for students. So at the moment, these rights and responsibilities live in a number of different places, in different documents. There are also student handbooks at the school level, but we need to make sure that we have a clear set of rights and responsibilities and comprehensive across the board for the district. So in doing so, we will be replacing Board Rule 509.10, and we will be ensuring that we're in compliance with the state's law, COMAR, which requires the development of a rights and responsibilities document for the whole system. And in creating that, we have to be sure that we are broadly engaging stakeholders, which we would probably do anyway, but that needs to include students, of course, and we have to ensure that we're disseminating that annually to our students and families. Okay. Next slide.
Dr. Ward, we're on addressing the policy committee's goals or the slide after that.
Okay, there, I couldn't see it. Thank you. Okay, so the goals that were set forth for our group back in the January 2022 presentation. First of all, and this is one that we're very focused on as we, come together as a work group, making sure that this process and the results of the process address concerns that have been raised on multiple occasions about the historic marginalization of some of our students and student groups in student government and more broadly in the work of the life of our district. So we will be addressing that both through the way that we shape the process to make sure that there is broad engagement and input from lots of different students and student groups, student-led organizations, and by continuously looking at the actual content of the policy and regulation to make sure that they are getting at addressing those concerns that have been raised. We are working to promote SGA alignment with ASCBC, and I think that Haley will be able to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. We want to make sure that ASCBC is more representative of city schools across the board. So some of the accomplishments to date include Haley, I'm sorry, did I take your slide? I just realized I was diving in and giving all your achievements. Go ahead.
Oh, no. It's all good. It's a team effort. Yeah, so definitely making sure that ASCBC is serving as effectively as a coalition of student governments, developing young people's capacity across our district, and that SGAs at their schools are also effective. So just a couple points to lift up. One is that This year, ASCBC is more representative of city schools than it has been in the past. We increased voter turnout in the November election by a factor of 10. More schools are represented in the executive board, of which Yasmin and Grant are members than in previous years. And then also ASCBC is drawing its priorities from its base, right, by holding an issues assembly in December at the General Assembly meeting. And you'll hear more about that from Yasmin in just a minute. And then additionally, using ASCBC as a convener to build student leaders' capacity as well, so that SGAs at their schools and students who are in student government are able to then serve as envoys of student leadership and to help in kickstarting other student-led organizations at their school. And I think that's a good place to pause here. So I'll kick it back to you, Sarah.
Okay. You can go on to the next slide, please. Great. So based on the feedback that we got from the committee and then the work group that has come together around this work, we created updated objectives for our work over the next few months. The first being a huge amount of stakeholder engagement, gathering input and looking at best practices of other districts. So part of what we're trying to do here is just update the policy and the regulation. We want to make sure that if there are gaps in it, if there are new realities that it doesn't address, that we are fixing those things and updating it. What I will say is that if you look at the policy and the regulation right now, the policy in particular is really pretty short and kind of technical. It has a lot of definitions, and frankly, it doesn't really say all that much about student organizations. So we really want to make this a more robust and powerful policy. And similarly, we want to really beef up the regulation as well to make sure that it's providing a lot of rich guidance for our schools. So in addition to just the what we would consider sort of regular updates and addressing gaps, this is our opportunity to integrate the language that we want to have around student government associations and ASCBC. It is an opportunity we see by building the SGAs and ASCBC into policy and regulation to really lay the foundation for making our student government associations more representative of our students and more powerful vehicles for our students' leadership. So in addition, of course, we not only are going to be focusing on the SGAs and ASCBC, but making sure that both the policy and the regulation do everything possible to highlight and support and bolster the work of Black Student Association, Gay Straight Alliances, and other student organizations. And then, as mentioned before, we will be focused on creating the student rights and responsibilities document. And as we go through this process, we, with the help of our friends in the legal team who are really good at this, will be making sure that everything we do is aligned across the many different policies and regulations that touch on various pieces of both things related to student organizations and to rights and responsibilities. Okay. So what does this look like in terms of process? We have already begun this work. We started in October as we came together, and the first phase is really a lot of that foundation setting, the landscape analysis of other districts, looking at what's happening across our own district, lots of consultation, and then just planning, laying out how we will get the work done. So that work has begun and is really ongoing at the moment. The next stage will be starting to make some draft revisions to the policy and the regulation, as well as drafting the rights and responsibilities document, and then seeking feedback and approval. So you'll see that when we move on through this presentation, we're both looking for input up front on what people want to see in the policy and regulation and the rights and responsibilities, and then we'll be looking for feedback on progressive drafts of the document. And then obviously it doesn't stop. Once this all gets approved by the board, we have to make sure that we implement it. And we are thinking about that as we do the work as well, because we want to be sure that this is not just a policy or regulation that sit on the shelf, but that in fact, this ends up getting implemented with not only to the letter of what's down on paper, but with the spirit in mind of trying to engage all of our students across the board and really promote leadership in an equitable way. And equity is part of both the process and the outcome that we're hoping to see. So that is cross-cutting. It has to be a part of the way we approach this and think about this work all the way through. Okay, moving on. So this is just a quick snapshot of how this plays out in terms of timeline. Obviously, today is the 17th. That's our framing discussion. From here, we will keep doing our research, our consultations, and we'll start working on those draft revisions. We come back to your committee on March 21st for our first presentation of the actual proposed revisions. And then based on your feedback and input from other folks in the community, we will make some updates and come back again April 25th. So that's the first reader to the full board on the 25th. And then another revision process and second reader is set for May 23rd. So as I said, stakeholder consultation, it's always important, but we feel it's particularly critical in this particular situation. Above all, we want to be sure that our students are really front and center in this whole process. Their input is the most important here, but of course we will also consult with staff, families, and community partners. Again, initial input is the first stage. So December to February, we'll be gathering that. And then we want feedback each time we come forward with proposed revisions. The student groups, we expect to engage upper elementary, middle, and high school. So this is consultation with various student groups, as well as through our friends in the student government associations and ASCBC. We have the opportunity to build this into our morning meeting and advisory sessions. So that's one way for us to reach a broad swath of students across the district, which we're excited about as well. For our staff, we will make sure that there are a number of different opportunities. Particularly, we've got existing forums where we can reach our school leaders, such as our school stat and our CLN meetings. And then we'll hold separate special consultation sessions for school leaders as well. Similarly, we'll set up consultation sessions for our teachers, our advisors to student organizations, and other school-based staff who may be interested. And we know that our partners in the unions tend to be very good sources of support for doing some of this engagement and outreach, and we will do that here as well. I apologize. The person who's running the slides just lost internet. So we're going to lose our slides for just a second and she'll be back up. So the student staff and then our family engagement and community engagement will include not only sort of broad open consultation sessions for our community and family partners, but also opportunities to work through our usual sort of, hang on, I'm going to get to my own slides here. Some of our regular partners in this work that we know we need to prioritize engagement with. So PCAB and CCAC, PTA, CBC, the Equity Advisory Committee, and Charter and Operator-Led Schools Advisory Board. I do want to give PCAB a shout out because before we even managed to connect with them, they reached out to us and asked to be involved and how they could support. And that included as well a representative from BTU. So they were really excited to be a part of this process, and we're looking forward to engaging with them. And then for all of the various stakeholder groups, we will give them an opportunity to provide written feedback as well. Jonathan, it looks like you're running the slides now. Thank you. We can go to the next slide.
No problem. Yeah, just let me know when you need me to transition.
I think you can probably keep going. This is great. Thank you. All right. So here's some of what's happened to date. As you can see, we've already formed a cross-functional work group. We have, and as you can see here, established, sorry, y'all, I'm having technical issues here. All right, so we've formed a cross-functional work group, and I'm going to hand over to Haley to share the rest of the accomplishments, because many of them are things she's leading.
Yeah, or that ASCBC is leading and I am supporting as an advisor. So one of the things that ASCBC has done is collaborated with the work group, the JJA work group, and has formed a subcommittee to kind of lead ongoing collaboration. So one of the things that Yasmin will be talking about in just a moment is the ASCBC conducted focus groups with 22 SGAs at the December General Assembly meeting to gather feedback on what they want to say, what they would like to see in a student government policy, as well as policy to support the growth of other student-led organizations. The other thing that the work group has really been digging into is research on best practices for policies governing student government and student-led organizations, as well as student rights and responsibilities, both on the state level and nationwide. And then I think, Sarah, you had already mentioned collaboration with PCAB. So we've held an initial meeting with PCAB and are looking forward to collaborating with them further to do additional stakeholder engagement. Currently in process is a landscape analysis for the state of SGAs, SLOs, and school-sponsored student organizations across city schools. And then Jonathan, would you mind going to the next slide? Awesome. So some of the initial considerations that we know that we're going to need to integrate into JJA are alignment with other board policies. So I won't belabor the point, but there's a list there of board policies that are very clearly connected to JJA and that we'll need to be returning to and integrating. We'll also be looking at codifying in policy the requirement that every high school have an SGA. So this is a requirement that we rolled out at a school staff meeting on November 30th, but we can certainly explore integrating that into the policy as well. Additionally, something that we're going to want to integrate into the policy is requirements and guidance to schools to bolster students' ability to create and run organizations. So really clarifying that students have a right to organize and that they need the support to do that well, to participate in student government and to engage with their school leaders and other adult-led groups in order to have their voices heard at the school level. And then the last big point here would be to set common expectations related to student organizations and student government, as well as students' rights and responsibilities, so that there's greater equity and access for all students across city schools. There's also an error in the policy. A reference to JEA-RA needs to be corrected to JJA-RA. And John, perfect, thank you. So just to lift up some of the initial findings from the research we've started doing on other LEAs, something I think is interesting and maybe exciting is that for us is that few other LEAs have policies about student government, and few have robust policies on student-led organizations. And so city schools really has an opportunity, I think, to break ground in this area and demonstrate a real commitment to supporting student leadership. Among LEAs that do have student government policies, they're often integrated into regulations on students' rights and responsibilities. So if you look at Montgomery County and Baltimore County, that's how they've done it there. And then also LEA policy approaches to student organizations very widely, as it does the depth and breadth of their guidance. Some are integrating this into policy and regulation, others are integrating it into guidance or student handbooks. Some just have a statement on their website, but no corresponding policy. So there's a lot of diversity out there. And then in terms of thinking towards the process of policy around rights and responsibilities, again, this is sort of, we're in the initial stages here of looking at what it would be to codify that, but other LEAs are including things like a right to organize, a right to speech, a right to be free of harassment, a right to seek and hold office in student government, a right to be involved in school district decision making, and certain rights that students have around communication and response from administrators, for example, as well as a right to participate in extracurriculars. And then we can, and a lot of them also include aspects connected to dress code, technology. So some rights and responsibilities handbooks are fairly encompassing. And I've just noted there which LEAs we've explored their policies pretty extensively. All right, John, perfect. All right, so please forgive the wall of text here, but just some initial things that we're seeing in other LEAs, student government and student-led organization policies. I've kind of grouped them here. So one is the establishing the value and rights of student-led organizations, right? So our current policy basically says, here's what student organizations can't do and can't be, and has no affirmative statement of the value that student-led organizations and student organizers bring to their school ecosystems. So starting by really establishing the value and rights that students have in establishing student-led organizations, participating in collaborative decision-making, school climate, student success, and also establishing clear protocols by which students can organize, right? So that they know what processes to follow. Some districts have explored linking student government to other formal decision-making structures, and they're called different things in different LEAs, but something analogous in our district would be exploring connection to school family community councils. And then also making sure that we establish clear expectations and guidelines that ensure school leaders are responsive to student leaders and student organizations. Another sort of bucket of things that show up in other LEA's policies are clarifying structures and with an eye toward equity, ensuring equity. So how we'll define SGA in relation to other student organizations is something to consider. What process and characteristics an SGA needs to have to ensure that they're representative of and accountable to all students. And then making sure that all students have equitable access to participate in other student-led organizations. And so that's going to require an analysis of our eligibility policies, as well as the cost for participation in student-led organizations. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're taking a page out of other LEA's books that are thinking about how to build the capacity of student leaders. So leveraging the school-based SGAs to support the development of other student-led organizations. And then also setting the expectation that city schools will develop student leaders, both SGAs and other student-led organizations, and taking advantage of the fact that we have these district-wide youth-led bodies like ASCBC and the Youth Leadership Advisory Council for the CEO, that can serve as conveners and capacity builders. Okay, that's it for that. Great. So this is where I'm gonna turn it over to Yasmin Blanchard, who is our Vice President of ASCBC. Yasmin, maybe introduce yourself first, and then and then tell us about this slide.
Okay, so hi. As Haley said, my name is Yasmin Blanchard. I'm the vice president of the ASCBC, and I was a previous LGBTQ liaison, and I'm also on my school's GSA. At ASCBC December General Assembly meeting, ASCBC convened with the SGAs from across 22 schools and led focus groups on how these SGAs felt in regard to JJA. Our General Assembly is the basis of the information I'm about to share. Students want their SGAs to have more input on school decision making. In addition to providing feedback after decisions are made, they also want to participate in decision making processes and bodies. Students express the need for more consistent, open, and proactive communication between SGAs, administration, and teachers. Students perceive that activities and clubs are mostly adult-led, and that students are not included in deciding what kind of extracurriculars are available to them. Students express a need for clear protocols and support in finding club advisors, getting approval from administration, and securing facilities and resources for student-led organizations and initiatives. Students express that, I'm sorry, I cannot read the bottom of that slide. Okay, sorry. Sorry, give me 1 second. I just cannot, like, thank you. Okay, sorry. Students express that they do not understand the process for starting clubs or feel that they are not allowed to start clubs. Thank you.
Great. And actually, before I address this next slide, I do just want to, first of all, thank Yasmin and the students again for all the great work that they have done already, both just getting up and running this year, but then immediately diving in to work with our group on this important policy. I will say that they are sort of out ahead of the curve, and Haley's been doing some wonderful work with the students having just arrived in her role. We are seeing the work that we're doing so far with SGA and ASCBC as almost a proving ground, a way for us to learn more about our process. And we'll be taking some of our lessons learned from this process with the students in ASCBC and applying that as we reach out and continue our efforts to connect with other student groups as well. So it's really great to have our students here working with us on this, and we're looking forward to connecting with even more groups of students. So when we think about the implementation and measurement phase of this, we know that we need to, once we have our policy and regulation in place, but some of this may come into the regulation too, making sure that we are doing everything possible to provide our school leaders, our advisors, our students themselves, and other folks a clear understanding of what's in the policy and regulation, what the student rights and responsibilities are, what the expectations are for both adults and students, and then the supports that will be available. In some cases, we imagine that there will be some schools that may need some added support, and so we will make sure that we have central office staff available to assist them. In terms of knowing whether this is all working, part of what we want to do is create a profile that we can come back to continuously of what would a really high quality, high impact student government association or other type of student-led organization look like, and have a rubric that helps us and helps students and staff at the school level evaluate what's happening. The types of measurements we may be looking at are looking at student leadership development, how often the groups are actually meeting, the projects that student groups may be leading, and the impact of those results, or sorry, of those projects on school communities or the district as a whole. And then how student groups are communicating with school administration and how that's playing out and how everybody is experiencing that process of engagement. And one critical element of this is making sure that we're looking at who's actually participating in these groups and how representative that student participation is relative to who's in a school's population of students. And then we also will be looking at different policy evaluation tools. There's one in policy KCA that we think would be helpful as a guide for us. And we're going to be continuing our engagement process, wanting to get ongoing feedback from students, staff, and families. And then we have national best practices and evaluation tools that we can look to as well to potentially guide the way we do this work. Okay. And this is certainly not at the end because it's less important. Actually, it kind of brings home, I think, the central importance of equity, again, both as part of the process that we're going through here, as well as what we are trying to achieve with the way that we revise the policy, the regulation, and creating our student rights and responsibilities. We have been and will be continuously using our guiding questions for application of an equity lens. We have met with our equity team, Dr. Durant, and our colleague Chinamawi, and they have been wonderfully helpful to us already in thinking about this work, and they will continue to be our partners and consultants in this as we go through. But we know, again, that a key aspect of this whole process has to be ensuring that we are engaging as broad an array of students and other stakeholders as possible so that we're bringing in a multitude of backgrounds and perspectives. And then how do we ensure that equity continues to be a central focus throughout? So the eligibility requirements that we integrate for, be it student-led organizations of any kind, including Student Government Association, we've got to make sure that the way that those are structured allows for maximum participation and representation. The rubric that we mentioned a minute ago also needs to have equity built into it. We've talked about the representation issue. That's essential. And then providing support. We may need to come in and provide some increased support to particular groups of students. We can even do that from the central level. It doesn't necessarily always have to just be done at the school level. And then we will have to be extremely, I think, clear and explicit in our guidance to schools about how they can go about implementing this policy and the regulation, the student rights and responsibilities, and the importance of how they engage with students around the implementation as well. So with that, we will turn back to the committee for questions or thoughts you may have for us to take away.
Absolutely. First, thank you all so much for this presentation and all the work that has already been done. Haley, I wasn't there when you were able to come to the board and talk about the work that was done with the election. And hey, it's good to see you. But I just think it was remarkable what you and the team were able to do and how students showed up when adults got out of the way, honestly. Like we just provided the mechanisms for them to do what they know how to do anyway, right? And I just think that's a beautiful thing. I have some thoughts that I want to share, but I want to be able to open it up to my colleagues on the committee first to see if they have any questions and thoughts. Remember, this is a discussion, so all the stuff that we're talking about here is just to be helpful in the shaping of this work moving forward. So I'll open it up for whoever has questions or thoughts to share.
I think that the thing that really stood out to me the most was how much the expansion of the idea of a student bill of rights was to shaping JJA as well as our general policy towards students going forward. And I think that was really incredible. And I think that especially going into a new time when a lot of things, I like that you touched on the fact that we're talking about digital rights of students have too, because it's increasingly difficult to be able to do the job of administrators and teachers when there is sort of this whole new frontier that people in past generations, both students and teachers, didn't necessarily have to deal with. And I think that being able to think about that and formulate a more uniform way of doing things with regards to internet safety, as well as the rights of students, and balancing those two things is going to be really important, and will hopefully be a big step forward for the way that we're handling student discipline, as well as students' education regarding internet privacy and safety.
Thank you for that. I'm just taking quick notes, so I'm going to stay quiet here. But thank you.
Yeah, no, I'll chime in and just say a few things, but I know for sake of time, this has been wonderful to hear all of these different pieces. And, I just wanted to underscore the call that Yasmin, I heard from you about consistent, open, and proactive communication, right? Those three words really stuck out about what you are asking for and what you are expecting and what is appropriate and reasonable and should be expected, frankly. So, those three words really stuck out to me, what you were saying. And as I heard the conversation around the policy currently being pretty light, obviously there's a balance between being prescriptive and sort of dictating all the things that should happen and the role of policy. And, some of what I'm hearing in what you are saying and what you all are doing, frankly, is the balance between the policy and the capacity building. And so the question that I don't need to answer for right now, but that I would encourage you all to think about is what % of the growth needed is a focus on the policy changes versus the capacity building to carry forward, and I also really appreciate, Haley, your reference to the lack of positive affirmation, statements. And I think Commissioner Katz-Zogby, your reference of a student bill of rights, is sort of saying not just the this is what you can't do and this is what it can't be like, but actually being able to say the positive matters a lot. It's much, I think that matters. So those are just some comments, but I really appreciated this, and I know it was a long and a lot to cover, but that's because there's a lot of things you all have been doing. And that's it's something that I know my colleagues on the school board care about, as not just those of us here on this committee, but I know this is an area that will generate a lot of positive conversation and desire to think about how we can support. So Commissioner Sal, I'll throw it over your way if you have other things to add, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. No, I'll build on the 2 points I heard earlier, which were great, and echo just my appreciation for the work that you guys have done. So similar to something that Commissioner White just said, I think one of the things that I think will be helpful in the framing when this comes for first reader is being really clear about what we can see that is, and what we can expect to see that's different as a result of undertaking new policy change and how that works to implementation. I like that link to capacity building. I think that's one element of that, but I know that there are other things that we should really think about and consider as a board. And second, my other kind of point here is looking at the role of equity. I like how you guys talked a little bit more about getting more voices in the conversation, but making sure that in the policy we're looking at explicit reference to access and inclusion and the role of supporting underrepresented voices in the conversation around better supporting our scholars. So making sure that, when we're really talking about making sure that our scholars from across the city are represented, that we're seeing students who come from schools that don't always get highlighted. And so schools that are students who are in schools that have higher concentrations of poverty than others, that represent our EL community, that represent our Black students, since this is a majority minority city, and making sure that they're represented at all levels. So both within ASCBC and leadership roles, but also in our student groups as well.
Thank you all for those comments. I will just chime in. I definitely agree with the balance between implementation and policy, right? What needs to be codified in policy in order for the work that has to be done in implementation to happen effectively and efficiently. is definitely just a big question. I know you all are pondering, but I want you all to start to really think about how to formulate that, and working with the legal team, I'm sure you'll be able to do that. The other piece that came up for me was just ensuring that even some of our student-led organizations that we have out here, like thinking about the ones too that are super active in showing up in board meetings and like make their voices very well heard, that may not be centralized in a school, but work with students from across the city. Youth as Resources comes to mind for me, because they're very, very active, very proactive. They have a lot of reach and a lot of opinions and thoughts on things. And I think it's important for them to be included in the table when we're thinking about how this policy is formed, but also the town halls and stuff that happen, like ensuring all of our groups are included. And then something else that came up for me was just moving from the what, which is the policy, like, okay, what are we codifying, to the how, and taking the time, because I see the time that's being built into forming this policy and revising it and making sure that it's massaged well and all the stakeholders are involved. I would love to ensure that you all are thinking about the how part of that process in the same way, because I love this long arc. I have to tell you, there are times where I know a lot of folks feel like there are things that are introduced to the board policy-wise that don't have a lot of time to sit with stakeholders and community members. And on the policy side, you all are already doing this really well. So thinking about on the implementation side and on that capacity building side, how to continue that long arc of making sure that whatever roots are planted with this policy through implementation, they're strong, and that gives the right foundation for everything to grow properly. And I think this leads me to my last point, which is around one of the main goals of this work is to ensure that there is this clear common ground for student government associations across the district, right? And that every high school is able to have one. On the flip side of that, making sure that on that implementation side, you're thinking about where are you seeing, and I know you're doing your landscape analysis, where are you seeing that extra support might be needed to ensure that all SGAs can function equitably, right? Because everyone's going to need a different type of support. And what does that look like coming from the district? What does that look like coming from our community partners? What does that mean for folks who are involved? But I just want to say thank you and kudos for this work. It is a big task. It is a big undertaking, but it's absolutely necessary for us to really live into our values, and having that asset-based thinking of our students as leaders, because they are, and knowing that the way that we even frame the words in our policies and our Students' Bill of Rights needs to be revised in order to show that that's what we think, and those words being formulated from the mouths of our students, I think is one of the most powerful things that we can do as a district. So yeah, thank you. Anything else from folks before we move on? I want to give Sarah and Haley and folks a chance to respond if they need to.
No, I mean, I've been taking copious notes. I think all of the points all of you made were extremely helpful. They make sense to me, and I think they help us, just maintain our focus on what's important. And I appreciate the emphasis on how we're building that bridge from policy to implementation. And I think I also heard, being careful that we're not sort of confusing the two, because it could be tempting to put it all in. And we know that policies that are too unwieldy end up not actually being that helpful. So just being really thoughtful about policy versus regulation versus guidance, and then ultimately support for implementation. And I did take a particular note on this issue of the technology as a new sort of element of what really probably didn't exist in quite the same way the last time this policy was looked at. So I appreciated that flag as well. So thank you all for listening this long and for providing some helpful feedback. We will definitely take that into account.
Thank you all so much. Amazing work. And now we are ready to move on to policy ADH, which is a community schools policy.
Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm Chris Battaglia, Director of Community Engagement, like I had mentioned before. And on behalf of the community schools team, under leadership of Tina Hike-Hubbard, Chief of OCEE, Sheila Drummond-Cam, the Manager of Community Schools, Holly Gonzalez, our Community Schools Administrator, Seema Shah Nelson, Community Schools Specialist, and Kenya Smith, our Community Schools Specialist. We want to thank you for taking this time to listen to the work of the revision group, the policy revision group for ADH. And also I wanted to thank Josh Sibin and his office for their help with the policy. I think, Seema, do you have the PowerPoint to show up? Great. All right. Thanks. You can go to the next slide. Our community schools policy, ADH, addresses three of the priorities that in the board priorities. Number 4, of course, being engaging the stakeholders. Number 5, providing equal access to district services, resources, and facilities. And number 7, continuously work towards equity at all levels. We wanted to make sure that we highlighted those priorities that they will appear being addressed in the policy as we go through it. Next slide. So what is a community school? Someone my age would think a community school is the school in your community. And as a principal of a community school for 11 years, that's exactly what I thought it was when I first became principal at Ben Franklin. And what I learned was the community school is the strategy. And sometimes that title can sometimes be a little bit misleading. This graphic is reflective of the language in ADH and also in the Kerwin blueprint. A community school is a place and a set of partnerships that integrate academics, health, social services, child community development, college career readiness, family and community engagement. For example, 56 Maryland food bank distribution sites, plus more that distribute weekend backpacks or partner with other CBOs to promote food stability. Community school coordinators lead or participate on attendance teams, home visits, soliciting donations for incentives, connecting families to resources to overcome barriers to regular school attendance. Opportunities for families and community members, getting a GED class, having a GED class at their school, home ownership classes, homework diners, etc. Case management referrals, eviction prevention, energy assistance, partnering with legal aid, and so on. Establishing community gardens, identifying community-based organizations to operate after-school programs, including clubs, tutoring, athletics. That's a laundry list. But I can tell you that firsthand, the power of community schools isn't in the laundry list. It's the impact that they make on the school. I've seen firsthand teenage boy break down in tears coming across an eviction notice in their house and not knowing what to do with that. Now, without exploring what's wrong with that student on that day, we would not know that. But in our school, as an example, he was able to articulate and say, this is what I saw. I don't know what to do. And then, to be honest with you, as a principal, I wouldn't know how to handle that. But I was able to bring in my community schools team, be able to stabilize that home, have the lights stay on, have the parent get other employment so that they didn't have to be as mobile as they had been in the past. Like, I can't express to you the power of the community school strategy in more than just a list of so many powerful things that we provide our students so that they can focus on academics and other members of the school community can, I guess, hone their own skills in the areas that they thrive the teachers can focus on those academics areas. Defining community schools, there's 4 main pillars that are reflected in the policy. Integrated student supports, which are wraparound services like food pantries, clinics, like I'd mentioned. We'll go into that a little bit later, in a little bit more depth. Expanding and enriching enriched learning opportunities. These could be after school, weekends, summers, practical learning opportunities, and community problem solving. Active family and community engagement, which is educational opportunities for parents. And collaborative leadership, where we employ democratic systems for decision-making and the collective wisdom of students, families, and community members. It's respected and it's leveraged. Some of the highlights for Baltimore City community schools. We have 133 community schools. That's grown exponentially over the years. For 18 years of experience operating community schools school partnerships with 18 lead agencies and communities citywide. Coalition is instrumental in writing and leading advocacy and increasing the funding for community schools, which is why we've grown to expanding it to 133 schools, serving all school management types and grade configurations. During this school year, community schools have developed and nurtured over 2,000 strategic partnerships with community-based organizations, anchor institutions, and businesses. During the last school year, community school coordinators leveraged more than $5.4 million in cash and in-kind donations to support their schools. That's absolutely amazing to be able to harness that power through a strategy of community schools where we actually are truly working in partnership, not just in money, which is amazing with $5.4 million in leveraged funds, but also in the services and the relationships that we build with our students, their families, and out into the community. Next slide, please. Baltimore City has, like I mentioned, 133 community schools, and they serve all management types and grade configurations. When considering core community school funding, it's primarily covered the cost of a full-time community schools coordinator. And there are 2 main sources of the funding. We have concentrations of poverty grants and funding from Family League through the city of Baltimore. This chart shows the proportion of community schools by funding type. Baltimore City has, like I said, 133 schools of all grade configurations and management types. And the funding to support community schools comes from these sources. 84 schools are funded by concentration of poverty grants. 38 schools are funded by both the concentration of poverty grants and the city of Baltimore through Family League. 5 schools are funded by the city of Baltimore Family League and the district through Title I. And 6 schools have a combination of funding sources, including school budgets, the Re-Engagement Center, and local philanthropy. Now I'm going to turn it over to Seema Shah Nelson, one of our community school specialists, who's going to kind of walk you through the landscape of the policy and why we've needed to do the change, and then kind of get a little bit more in detail as to what types of revisions we're proposing. Seema?
Hi, thanks, Chris. So the main driving force behind the revision of the policy is the dramatic increases in the funding and the expansion of community schools since 2005. So in 2005, we had the first community schools in Baltimore, which were just 4% of all city schools. And these schools were opting into the strategy. So they were entering into the strategy funded at different levels using philanthropic funding or funding straight from their school budgets. So implementation and interpretation of the strategy was going to vary across from school to school. By 2016, schools across the district were opting in. And so to norm the way community schools were, the community school strategy was implemented across the district, Baltimore established, and it was the first community school policy in the state. A year later, the Institution for Educational Leadership released community school standards, which drew upon evidence and best practices nationwide, and city schools shifted its practices to align with those standards. In 2019, we started receiving concentrated poverty grants, allowing us to expand the strategy to 50 schools, which represented 27% of all of our schools. And that same year, the board approved Equity Policy ADA, defining an equity lens and systems and structures for incorporating it throughout city schools. By 2021, the passage of the Kirwan Blueprint for Education legislation was passed, and we expanded the strategy to 133 schools, which is 79% of our schools. These slides are not advancing. There we go. See, pie chart moves. So we had 79% by 2021. And that's also when the Family Community Engagement Policy, KCA, was approved and revised. And shortly after, the Community School Steering Committee, which was led by City Schools and the Family League, created a 3-year strategic plan for community schools in Baltimore. So all of these policies changes, our revisions, our goal is to align with the following policies and documents, which are the revised board policies for family and community engagement, behavioral interventions and student discipline, and equity, of course. And then, of course, also the Kirwan Blueprint for Maryland's Future, the City Schools Blueprint for Success, and the Community School Steering Committee's 3-year strategic plan for all city community schools, and then the National Community School Standards. So the biggest shift that you'll see in our proposed revision, it accommodates the expansion of funding from Kirwan and CPG, which means that all schools are entering the strategy fully funded. And so the standards and expectations are the same across all schools, as opposed to before all of that influx of funding, when schools were opting into the strategy at different levels. So overall, the 2016 policy, which was the older policy, the first one, it created a definition for community schools, but it also created a developmental continuum of community schools. So schools were designated as an engaged school, then a partnership school, and then a full service community school. And along that continuum, the Community School Steering Committee had a process of designating or certifying community schools at each point along that continuum. So the biggest change to the policy is related to this continuum. So it's removing this continuum, the whole idea of the continuum, and equalizing expectations across all of our community schools. The updates that we're proposing, we're shifting the language to align with the blueprint about the purpose of community schools and expanding the action planning process to integrate the community school strategy with other school plans and data. We've also outlined democratic processes for the steering committee, in which the CEO of city schools and the local management board, which is the Family League, have veto powers. And we've also updated the reporting process. So instead of the steering committee, which is made up of a whole bunch of stakeholders reporting to the board, as it was in the 2016 policy, in the revision, city schools will be accountable to the board for all the school level outcomes. So we've also streamlined the data that's collected for those accountability measures to align with reporting that's required by other federal, state, and local policies. Additions to the policy. So what we've added to the policy, we've added the 4 pillars that Chris discussed earlier. And this is really important since they really are the central organizing principles of the whole strategy and its implementation, and are reflected in the Kirwan Blueprint as well as in this policy in the way that it's organized. We've also reflected and expanded on the Kirwan Blueprint's description of the needs assessment process and the principal's role in community schools. We've incorporated guidance from KCA and from the Blueprint to engage the School Family Community Council and the community school strategy as partners and as a stakeholder group for accountability. And finally, we've made it clear that any school that opts into the strategy is held to the same standards as other community schools, honoring that we know that the community school strategy is valuable to all school communities. The Kirwan Blueprint includes a section on wraparound services with a list of things that would be included under that umbrella. We've restated the same language as integrated student supports that aligns with our 4 pillars language of community schools. And we've included this list directly pulled from the blueprint. And what this does is it clarifies that this is a list of possible wraparound services. So wraparound services may include these 13 items. And then also we can provide those services through referrals to other agencies, city agencies, community-based organizations, and other partners as well. So overall, when revising the policy, we've made recommendations falling into these buckets. First, specificity. We wanted to clearly differentiate between the overarching community school strategy, individual community schools as sites for implementation, and the coordinator as a role within the community school. We are also aligning the concepts underpinning the strategy with national standards, Kirwan, and other board policies, and adjusting to the expansion of community schools and community school funding. And so this is the piece about deleting the continuum of community schools and all of the processes associated. And this, again, is the biggest shift that you'll see reflected in the revisions. And we are also updating the roles and responsibilities of the Community School Steering Committee. So we're creating clear systems for stakeholder groups and subject matter experts to ensure that the strategy is implemented with fidelity and in line with best practices. And finally, we are aligning our language with relevant board policies. And now we get to the regulations. So you'll see the policy revisions are all reflected in the regulations. And the first thing that you'll see, of course, is that we've deleted the whole community school continuum and processes associated with it. We've also updated the reporting structure so that there is a shared leadership with stakeholders in the form of the steering committee. But it's still, of course, we mentioned before, makes it clear that city schools and not the steering committee that is accountable to the board. And we're also shifting the reporting from annually to every 3 years, and that aligns with work that's being done at the school level and by the steering committee. We've expanded the role of lead agencies in partnership development to be more efficient, and we've made professional development for principals more accessible. Some of the additions, we've added democratic systems for electing members of the steering committee, and we've expanded membership to more stakeholders, so more parents, more students, more coordinators, and community members. We've also outlined the role of the lead agency in ensuring deliverables are submitted on time so that lead agencies are partners in data collection and reporting. Additionally, lead agencies having the closest relationship with coordinators and principals. They'll contribute to the professional development for everyone involved in the strategy. And we've also reflected what our current model of shared leadership is with the local management board, in which we lead a partnership for data collection, evaluation, and professional development. Whoops. Are we? Here we go. Okay, so the revisions to the regulations, our goals here in the buckets that we were really looking at carefully was the oversight, the material and processes that are used in oversight, in defining the roles and relationships between lead agencies, the steering committee, and city schools, and leading the whole strategy, and creating space for the expansion of the strategy using alternative funding sources and standardizing practices across all schools, regardless of their funding sources. We've also outlined professional development, evaluation metrics, and activities so that while there are district-wide norms, there is still flexibility and the ability to be strategic. Stakeholder engagement. So our revisions to the policy are informed by feedback from key stakeholder groups. So that includes families, partners, students, lead agencies, community members, school staff, district offices, and school leaders. We use a variety of tools, presentations, focus groups, surveys. We'll engage families through PCAP, through CCAC, and we have 3 sessions scheduled with students. We'll engage staff in partnership with the BTU and present to the Office of Community Engagement, the Equity Committee, and to principals. And we'll have a public survey in which district offices, community members, families, and students will be able to give feedback that we can collate by stakeholder group. And this is our work group. You'll see we've got a student, partners, lead agencies, a principal, as well as folks on our team here. That's it. Questions, comments? Thank you.
Thank you all so much for that presentation. I'm going to open it up to my colleagues for any questions that they may have.
So one that I had is based on all of the work that you guys are going to do, especially around stakeholder engagement, does this present an opportunity to really re-examine the definition of partnerships to ensure that it's as inclusive as it can be, that can talk about both what we hope to learn from the partnerships that are in place at our city schools level, but as well as what our schools can give back to partners, as well as understanding any necessary safeguards and guardrails in our partnerships. And that may be two separate things. So
yeah,
that.
I mean, I think it does open up that door, and I think that the beauty of being early on in the still getting the feedback from a lot of different groups, that it's gonna help us better define not just what I guess is going to help us do what you're saying, define what it means to be a partner with city schools, and how that translates into not just money and services, but what that relationship means that better the community and our families. So I think it does open up that conversation, and hopefully through the different stakeholder groups that we're engaging with, we'll be able to get a little bit more clarity too as to what they see as a valuable partner.
No, and I appreciate that, because I think there's this notion that a partnership is two ways, and we want to make sure that, like, when we're looking at city schools as being a real kind of strategic partner and anchor in our communities, that we're able to speak with clarity and conviction about what we have to offer in each and every one of our schools. I would just encourage us to really examine that definition of partnership. And on the back end, and this is certainly, like, I don't responsible for this, but I think it is an opportunity as well to really look at where safeguards and guardrails need to be in place around community partnerships in order to really best understand, like, our interests, the interests of our students, and the interest of our partners as well.
Yeah, definitely agree.
That's all I have.
One or two sort of questions that I have. First, I'll just start by saying thank you for the amount of work and the long arc here. I know Commissioner Griffin referenced a long arc with other sort of presentation as well, but this certainly has that, and years, and seeing how Kerwin has sort of expanded and pulled from what Baltimore City Schools has let out on community schools here in Maryland is something that I think we should lift up and celebrate. And not just gloss over, and I think it does underscore how much schools are the beating heart of communities, and how much of a difference they make. Now, to Commissioner Sally's point a little bit, the desire for partnership can become ever expanding, right? Partnerships on all the things, and I do feel like community schools provide a structure in which to partner. That is a strategy, and I appreciated your focus on that, Mr. Battaglia, in your reference to the work. My question, though, is I have one or two different questions, but my first question: at various meetings, for example, the community board forum that was back that I had the opportunity to participate in the fall at Pimlico Elementary Middle, and I know you were there as well as other members of the team. A lot of the community expressions of desire and interest focused repeatedly on the desire for trauma-informed care to be a focus and a focus of activities and support. And I know that things like community schools have known that that's been important before, and the work predates a lot of the focus and attention and the label of trauma-informed care. My question, though, is how would you consider the work of community schools intersecting with trauma-informed care, the efforts and interests relating to that? How would you see those two intersecting?
Well, I think when you look at the list of services that could be identified through the needs assessment, when that you take a look and you say, is the school capable of providing services on site? Are they more equipped to connect to services off site? The main thing is making sure that the students and families get those services. And so community schools is the link to that. And the beauty of community schools, it's customized, right? I mean, when you have a community school, you're truly trying to be responsive to the needs of that community. And so it wouldn't necessarily look the same everywhere. It would mainly be what are the needs of each school and each community, and how can we best connect them to the services. You also would have to work in conjunction with other offices at North Avenue that obviously work specifically with issues and concerns around trauma-informed education. And so, because you don't want to have everybody trying to address something as serious as that, thinking they're helping, but if it's not a concerted effort or on the same page, it actually can make it a little bit muddier. So I think that we have to listen to what it is that people are asking for, and then the community school strategy helps connect them with what best meets the needs that they're expressing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so I would encourage, and I saw in that list of 13 mental health supports was one of the 13 sort of supports that was there. As you all are thinking about, perhaps either calling that out specifically as a part of that item, or thinking about how is there a thread that relates specifically to trauma-informed care, just knowing how much the community, and frankly, community school coordinators. I think about Mr. Witherspoon, Corey Witherspoon, who's at Pimlico Elementary Middle, and his work as a community school coordinator, also heavily involved with trauma-informed care broadly. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing and your response there to my question as you're sort of working through this process.
And I was going to say, I also think that that work rests in the Office of Wholeness, and so again, having a connection to that office that really understands that work in much more depth is extremely important whenever we're dealing with mental health or trauma informed decisions.
No, absolutely. And I think Dr. Warren, who obviously is on this call as well as presenting, there's so much intersect there, and that's the relationship between the school-based community schools and the central office that you're referencing, is like, how do those two things line up? And and community schools is not the only manifestation of trauma-informed care, thinking about the advisory hours and the blocks and but thinking, how does this all intersect, and what are the ways that they are layered together? I think that.
I think that's kind of, to me, that's part of the beauty of a community school. I was a coordinator until just a few months ago. And part of the beauty is that you're a coordinator, right? Like, you're bringing all the pieces together. So you have someone in the building who is actually like reaching out to that, to Dr. Warren's office, or reaching out to this different place, or, maybe they're different city agencies or other, like a church across the street, right? And putting all of those pieces together so that you can, really wrap around a student, a family, an individual, right? And I think that that's really the beauty of a community school coordinator, is actually doing exactly what you were saying, is just making all of those connections.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And my second is more of a comment, which is, as you were describing some of the changes in policy, what I'm sensing and seeing is a shift towards increased maturity and predictability, right? Sort of removing some of the continuum, shifting towards city school central, based reporting, expanding some of the reporting timelines, some of the professional development metrics. That really does feel like a broader sort of like there's more predictability, there's more maturity, and there's a defined model here that has been refined over the years. I have some thoughts that I want to like work through on that and think a little bit more to see if you know there's questions I have as you're presenting those, but that's what I'm seeing in a larger sense of what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Thank you both. Commissioner Quinn, did you have anything to add?
Sorry, just struggling with technology a bit here. I would like to, I think, agree with some parts of what both Commissioner Coyne and Commissioner Sally said about the importance of holistic care around a student. I would just like to make sure that I think that if we are going to implement something like this, where we see more of a focus from city schools about a more holistic approach to the wellness of individual students as well as the communities that surround them, it is not something that is offloading the responsibilities of other branches of the government onto school districts. Because I think that it is clear when, at least looking around in the community that I grew up in West Baltimore, as well as the community that I now live in North Baltimore, and the communities across the city that my fellow students come from, that our communities are hurting, and that these communities are a lot of times in shambles because of very direct policies and modes of organization of various branches of our state that have been deeply, deeply flawed from their very inception. And I worry that if we are simply accepting too much of that responsibility as a school district, we are moving the focus away from those institutions which caused these problems to begin with. You know, because that sort of trauma does not come from nowhere. That comes from the trauma that's inflicted onto our communities by these various organizations, whether that be the destruction of our welfare state, or that be the militarization of the police department, or the deindustrialization of the American economy. All of these things are things that are very explicit problems, that the effects of which are being shown in our communities and through the students and children being produced by those communities. But I think that if we are careful to be doing what we can, but not more than what we should, then this program of community schools could be a really great thing in the lives of a lot of young people in the city. And I think definitely would have been great for me, and will be great thinking about the future lives of my little sister, who's going into middle school next year in Baltimore City, as well as all of the other young people that I've known and hope the best for throughout my time here.
That was really just so profoundly true, and I really appreciate you raising that up. And I think it is something for us to think about, and part of why we have those 4 pillars of community schools. So we do the integrated student supports, where we're wrapping around individual kids and families, but we also have this expanded idea of collaborative leadership, where we are partnering with families and with communities, and sharing those, raising up those voices and amplifying those voices, for creating those sorts of changes. Hearing communities and amplifying their voices and advocacy is also very much a part of community schools.
Sorry about that. I can never figure out. To build on that, I think there's an opportunity to help the board understand the articulation, kind of moving from like policy to the articulation around the strategy, and what we can reasonably expect to see as like outcomes, for students in terms of student achievement, graduation rates, school improvement, and these other intangible things and other tangible things for families and communities that we do or should consider. I would love to see that and understand that a little bit more at the board level. as well as helping school leaders to really understand those investments as well. As you're considering this policy. To put the bow on it. Thank you, guys.
I think that my colleagues have said a lot of some of the points or questions that I had. The only thing that does come to mind for me, it is more on the implementation side. So I'm going to say that to preface my comment, but it does actually have to do with the community school coordinators and training and their ability to work with so many different moving parts in a school to bring all of these different programs in. And so I want to make sure that as we're crafting this policy, that we're thinking about folks that would be deeply impacted by having to carry out a lot of that work. Our community school coordinators, and you know this, Seema, are amazing. They are, sometimes I want to say, miracle workers. They make ways out of no ways. They find programs from everywhere you can think of and just bring such a special component to community schools. And we always want to make sure that whatever structures we're putting in place when we're thinking about this long-term plan and this policy, that we are also thinking about the folks that will have to do a lot of the carrying out of the work and ensuring that on the flip side of things, we've taken into consideration the implementation of these pieces to ensure that they can do this work effectively and successfully. And that's just like the first thing that came to mind for me.
Commissioner Griffin, if I may just also lift up that we have Commissioner-elect Ashley Esposito in the meeting that's joining us, and although not on the board yet, just raising up some of her comments here in the chat. Appreciate her presence.
Absolutely. Hey, Commissioner-elect Esposito, can't wait for you to join us.
Thank you.
And thanks for chiming in. Right. Any other thoughts or questions around policy ADH? All right. Thank you both. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Sally.
No, I'm still learning how to use Teams. Sorry.
Oh. Hitting that mic button, huh? Oh man, I understand. Thank you both so much for this thoughtful presentation. And it is a conversation that I think we are all very excited and happy to have, and to see the continuation of this program and how much it has grown and how now it is really becoming very rooted and steadfast in its existence in Baltimore City Public Schools. So thank you for your work, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. So moving along in our agenda, we do have some some compliance reports for policy BCA, JFD, JBA, and JICK. And I just want to open it up to my colleagues to see if they had any questions about any of the specific policies, and we can go one by one. Any questions around policy BCA that need to be discussed today?
One question that I did have was just in the definition when it talks about employees required to file annual financial disclosure, if that's inclusive of school board members, as they're not technically employees, we're volunteers, I guess, in a sort of way, but just wanted to kind of see how that fits in, or if that's represented in these numbers or not.
Oh, good morning, commissioners. Yes, you all are included in BCAR, which the regulation has a specific list of which classes of employees had to file financial disclosures. But in addition, the ethics panel has also internally added some positions that they collaborate with HC on.
So just to put a fine point on that, when it says employees are required to file annual financial disclosures was 9, those are the 9 board seats that are filing that?
No. Those were 9 employees during the period that didn't file their financial disclosure. That's not you all. Every board member completed their financial disclosure. or all board members at last year.
Okay, that's good to know. And I missed that these were the ones that failed to file. That there were a number that failed, and that there are actions taken related to them. That answers my questions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sally?
Nothing on
Nope. Okay. Nothing, Commissioner Quinn. Okay. Policy JFD, withdrawals and reentry. Thank you, Christian.
So I
No
know
problem.
this has been lifted up once before in this particular policy. I'm still really concerned when I look at these numbers to understand like what we're doing to better build in a safety net when we're seeing students who are withdrawing for a variety of reasons, especially when we get to understand who our students are and which particular schools and communities have higher rates of withdrawals than others. Beyond just it being in a compliance report, I'd like to know a little bit more about what we're doing to target these particular school locations where we're seeing, and student populations where we're seeing higher rates of withdrawals than others.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Commissioner Sally. Thank you for the question. So I think there's a couple of points that I will reiterate from the report. But if I'm not getting to exactly what you're talking about, then please chime in. You know, a decent amount of the movement that we will see happens on the high school end, and it happens also with some of our alternative programs. Mm-hmm. The Re-Engagement Center is, you know, in addition to this report that did not happen previously. And I thought it was important to uplift the work that the Re-Engagement Center does so that as students are struggling, our high schools will refer them to the Re-Engagement Center at times, or frankly, students sometimes that have dropped out come back to the Re-Engagement Center and say, I've got my life back in order and I want to try to figure this out. So, you know, it's not a huge team in the Re-Engagement Center, but they do see a lot of students. They try to prioritize students that are closer to graduation. And, you know, you can see some of the numbers and they've been increasing, to be quite honest. That's one aspect of the work. I think the other aspect of the work is more age and grade related than it is school related. Mm-hmm. To your question, Commissioner Sally. And we've been working on what we call our On Track to Graduate work with our 9th and 10th graders specifically, because that is when students begin to get off track. I will say that I think the work is good, but I know in working with Dr. Dabrowski and the folks in College and Career Readiness, we're thinking that we can do more and are considering putting more efforts into our 9th graders. More supports for our 9th graders, more teaming on the high school end as they make that transition from middle school. I lift up the Re-Engagement Center and I lift up the 9th and 10th grade work because I think that is the lever that has to be pulled, both from the beginning part of high school and then when students fall off track. You know, there's a ton of details with that, but I would first lift that up and kind of follow up, Commissioner Sally, if there are additional details or schools you want to pinpoint.
So there are some early warning indicators in effect that like help us to understand like if we're looking at credit accumulation or whatever it may be, as kind of if we're looking at these early cohorts of students that can give us some focus and frame for some of our vulnerable children.
Yeah, that's right. When I say On Track to Graduate, I shouldn't have just thrown out that term. It is credit accumulation, and it is attendance, and it is passing classes in the 9th and 10th grade.
Got it. Okay. And then on the back end, and let me just say this, is like I'm concerned that we have very vulnerable populations of kids, especially our kids who are getting ready, that they're in this like overage, under-accredited space. And so our school leaders making sufficient, you know, referrals or doubling down on support for kids who are overage and at risk of leaving our system without a diploma.
I mean, I would generally say they are making a lot of referrals. What I would also point out is we expect them to be the first referral, right?
Mhm.
We expect them to be the first ones to see that a child is off track. And I say that because you can just tell a lot by the first and second quarter of the ninth grade year. And it's at that time when there has to be that initial intervention. So when I said we look at attendance and credit accumulation, and then I kind of actually said if you're passing your classes or not, because if you're doing that in your first 2 quarters of ninth grade, then that is the on track point. But but beyond that, when you start getting into your second and third year of high school, that's when they make, when I say they, the high schools make referrals to potentially think about an alternative placement if you've only got a few credits at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also thinking about the fact that Maryland only has a 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, so we know that those students, as they get further out in those out years, are not included in that calculation and that rate. And so that's also about, another indicator on the back end that very much concerns me. So
yes, and we don't talk about this much, but I do think our incentives should be student centered, such that if it takes a fifth year should be celebrated, right? We don't do that as much as we possibly could, and it's not in this report because it's about withdrawals and reentries, but very closely associated with that would be fifth. And and even if it were to take a sixth grade, now you start getting, past 21, which, that begins to go over a threshold. But I just think that continuing with students, no matter if they're in an alternative school, like say Excel or Achievement Academy, is something that we pay more attention to than is necessarily seen.
Yeah. Appreciate that. Those are my points. I'll create some space for my colleagues.
Awesome. And I'm seeing a question from Commissioner-elect Esposito that I'm going to ask here, and I also think that it's helpful for folks who might be listening just to know the process of, what happens when we have students who are withdrawing. Is there an exit interview for parents and students at withdrawal? Just to understand that process.
I would say on a school by school basis, there usually isn't, except, I don't know if I guess I would say, I don't know if I would call it an exit interview. I think that there are definitely discussions about if a child is or is not succeeding and why that is. And then usually the interview is usually at the re-engagement center, right? That is where we have social workers. That's where we do an intake to see both where the child is around credit accumulation, but also what their interests are and also why they haven't succeeded thus far. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily a standard exit interview, but I would say that there are ongoing discussions with the families, and then there is an interview when you walk into the re-engagement center.
Okay, so just so I understand that, say, for instance, you have student A and parent A is coming to withdraw their child. So this is like one type of situation. There's no interview with that parent that would ask them questions around their decisions. What is the withdrawal in reference to? Is there anything city schools can do to support them in staying in our district? I just want to make sure I'm hearing that.
Right. I would probably put this in 2 buckets. And one is if you're withdrawing because you're going to another school that's outside of Baltimore City Public Schools, then that's a standard, right, form, questions, making sure we've got everything, and then a receipt that you're actually going to another school. That's one aspect. I think if a child is struggling, right, that is where the referral to the re-engagement center happens for that interview process.
So if a child is struggling, are we talking about high school? Like, is the process different for a middle schooler versus a high schooler? Because you have different levels of engagement for parents at, at different levels of school. And so I'm curious around the thoughts of not having some type of standardized exit interview questionnaire that's always used to just gauge where the situation is for that student or parent if they are withdrawing at a certain point in our school system. So I'm curious around like one, maybe why we don't have one, and if there were thoughts about having an extra step in the process that could help to start to capture a lot more of the information that might be missing from understanding the decisions that our parents / students, because at a certain point it is a student that is also making this decision maybe on their own, that's causing this withdrawal piece instead of just at re-entry. There are some folks that we're missing in the data.
Yes, I might not be following you as well as I should, Commissioner Griffin. I think the standard, I mean, when you're talking about other grade levels, right, you started off by talking about earlier ages than high school. In many of those situations, right, that's not a student dropping out, right? That is a withdrawal that is going to another district. They might come back and they might re-enter, but usually at the younger grades, that is the norm. At the older grades, that's where sometimes if a child has dropped out, a school will do incredible due diligence to try to find the child, bring them in, and re-engage them themselves. And when they do that, right, that is when there's sometimes a transition to the re-engagement center, or sometimes they get them back into the school. And so I would say the effort and the effort and the emphasis is really on re-engaging the child, and in doing so, trying to figure out what their best next step would be. Is there a standard template for those questions? There isn't. There is at the re-engagement center. They have data that says, why did you why did you leave your previous school, or what are you struggling with? So we do have some data for that. I think at the point of withdrawal and potentially dropping out at a high school, it's just a little bit different in the sense that sometimes we're having a hard time finding the family or finding the child. And then when we do, there is a huge emphasis to get them back into the school more so than, the actual withdrawal form.
Okay. Thank you for that, Chief Davis. I do want to say that I think it's something worth looking into to have this kind of bookend of a common questionnaire. If you can get in touch with the student, if you can get in touch with the family, to have it then, because then that is data that will help us in how we are supporting these families and students better. And then if you can't, we know that if they're able to start to re-engage with us at that center, that's where the other side of the questions come in. And so we kind of have these double ends of information and data that we can utilize better.
Yeah, I also want to do a little bit of follow-up on my own, Commissioner Griffin, because there are different withdrawal codes. I just got to be clear if they are specific enough to get to the root of what you're asking, right? Sometimes the codes that we have in our systems don't get to what you're asking. So I should do a little follow-up on that.
Well, and if I may, and just underscore, I do think this question about the exit interviews, I really appreciate that framing from Commissioner-elect Esposito. I honestly believe that on the ground, the individual educators and staff that are there know a lot about what is contributing to somebody's withdrawal, perhaps, and thinking about at the high level, at the high altitude, is that data coming up in ways that is actionable, right? So when something that is undesirable happens, and students exiting the system is certainly, I would classify as undesirable. The concern I have is if it doesn't feel like we are learning from that to be sort of like thinking and reflective more than like the actual initial event, right? Like that's, and one of the things I wanted to lift up in this report, the compliance report, and I'm trying to recall if it was on a policy committee or an operations committee that I highlighted this previously, but one of the most important sections of any policy compliance report that I look at is number 3, is the challenges. And in this one, just felt like there wasn't as much reflection or thought in the challenges section to really get at some of the things that I think are being asked about here, right? Like trying to really understand, like, why is it that folks are leaving? And a little bit to Commissioner Sally's question, the disaggregation of that data, and a little bit to what you're speaking about with the different codes, while it is by grade, by age, and by school, I think there are some other ways to disaggregate the data and to look at the data, right? Whether gender or race, ethnicity, I think there's other ways that there's some real need and benefit, I would say, to data analysis on some of these items. I just would encourage you to and the team to spend time with that. I know it does take quite a bit. There's a lot of different constraints, but I think this would help sort of surface, are there areas that structurally could be improved to increase and increase the experience and the outcomes for students in city schools. And especially as I know from year to year, we have seen a decrease in our total student population, and COVID was a really difficult time for a lot of this, thinking about like, how do we improve upon what we are doing to attract, retain, bring folks back in, really does, I know we're all aligned in like wanting that outcome.
I would also like to really quickly echo something that Commissioner Sally was saying before, with the idea about students doing vocational training or career work or anything else that would possibly cause them to have like financial circumstances to leave school, because I think that would also be a very important data point to get, because that would be something that I think could help inform various policies both within the school system and outside of that for just the population writ large, in terms of like the problems facing young people in society. And I also would like to echo the idea that Commissioner-elect Esposito had about possibly also conducting similar, or at least having a better aggregation of data regarding departures from the school system for people in other positions. I think that the diagnosis of the problems can oftentimes be, or I think all the time actually, are important for figuring out what the solution to the problems raised are. Because I feel like we're in a circumstance where we know that things aren't necessarily working as well as they're supposed to function. I apologize. And being able to figure out the exact reasons behind that could go a really long way to be able to figure out how to get things functioning in a more efficient way and in a way that benefits everyone equally. Talking about a more equitable share of, more equitable solutions to the problems that are facing us.
Thank you, Commissioner Quinn. All right. Thank you so much, Chief Davis. I think we have exhausted our time in questioning on this one. We had a lot to say, and thank you so much for answering our questions and engaging in discussion with us, because that's just how we all get better and how we make sure as we're going through learning how these policies are behaving and how they're showing up in our system, that we can continue to improve upon the process. If there's any follow-up that you are going to send, or that commissioners want to continue to ask you, or anyone else that we've already had the chance to look at their compliance reports for, we'll send them through Christian, and Christian will be able to help coordinate those answers for us. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so the final ones we have are policies JBA, JBB, and JICK. Any questions on those before we move?
Yeah, I wanted to note a comment that I have when I look at the harassment, the work that's done on bullying, harassment, and suspensions. One of the things that concerns me a little bit in terms of both the definition and the aggregation or disaggregation of data is making sure that as our universe evolves, that we're talking about the ways in which our scholars can experience bullying, harassment, and discrimination. And I think one of the things that's missing for me is understanding how we're looking at how technology comes into play, especially as our schools continue to use and leverage technology that's ever present in our buildings and in our homes. I'm just curious why there's an omission of that, or what the thought is in terms of where we may see an opportunity for inclusion in our definition and our data collection efforts.
Thanks, Commissioner Sally.
Sally,
Yep.
for that question. Josh Sivan, Chief Legal Officer, and we do this report in conjunction with the school's office, specifically the Wholeness office. So Katia Stokes is often our partner in crime on this. But cyberbullying actually is a big part of the policy and is tracked in the data. I'll look back at the report and make sure, but it's part of the definition of bullying. And I believe I'm just trying to do two things at once and looking, but it's also in the categories of disaggregating in the chart that we submit to MSDE. But if it's not, it's interesting. MSD has a particular way of reporting this data, and Ms. Stokes and I have talked a little bit about how we can make our data more robust, even depending on what MSD reports. But we actually do capture and track, and also are doing affirmative work with schools and students about digital citizenship and the like, and recognizing that bullying can, as you indicated, be significantly exacerbated by cyberbullying.
I do see it in the one document that had like all of them just listed out as listed there, and it was referenced, as part of the training. I do think, there's one of the underlying operating assumptions that I have in looking at a report like this is that it is inherently going to undercount the number of instances and the number of items, and just trying to gain an understanding of that. And I think, to Commissioner Sally's point, especially likely to undercount in the digital cyberbullying space, and trying to think about how do we understand how much of a problem this may be and how many students are facing just such terrible types of interactions, and are we digging deep enough to see that in some of these spaces and then to support.
And it's a really important point, and I think that you'll see that bullying reports generally went up, as did reports based on sex-based harassment went up. And on one hand, that is part of that is the story, as we noted in the report, is a transition back to school post-pandemic. But I think that equally important, we've done a lot of work, both raising awareness, putting up posters, emphasizing Bullying Month, and the like that we talk about in the presentation. And we continue to do training and awareness among our staff and really get paid and clarify, for instance, that the bullying module, the bullying reporting form, is how you report sexual harassment, racial harassment. And so that's actually streamlined the process substantially. And so we hope that our number of reports gets closer to the number of actual experiences. But I think you're right, there's always going to be a delta, but our thought is that we've done better. That it's not that the bullying and harassment has necessarily gone up. What's gone up is is the number of incidents that have been reported, because and look to Commissioner Quinn on this too, is look to students feeling comfortable that if these are reported, staff will follow up and investigate. And we've emphasized with staff just how important it is to do that investment, follow up, and supportive practices. There's definitely area for continuous improvement, but I think we're getting better and better and tighter on that front.
So Chief Simmons, just make sure I understand correctly. So when I look at the number here, like when I look at the incidents of bullying, harassment incidents reported, they're lumped together, right?
Yes.
Is that just for the sake of the compliance report, or is there in other use cases here at city schools we're looking disaggregating by event?
Right. So first of all, a principal is getting each report that's coming in. Then the Wholeness office, the Fair Practices office that sits under me, is looking at weekly the reports that are coming across and looking for patterns and trends as well. So then this is the roll up on the year basis, if that makes sense.
Okay, it might be helpful, in my role as a commissioner, to understand where we see higher rates disaggregated rather than the commingling of the numbers together, so we understand where the system is starting to put more emphasis to protect students in this regards in other areas versus others.
We'll look to that going forward as well.
Thank you.
All right, one last go around for any more questions on those three policies. I got the shake no from Commissioner Quinn. No from Commissioner Court too. Okay. Thank you all so much. This was such a wonderful, healthy discussion. I love when we get to discuss compliance reports and have time for our staff discussion. Just double checking to make sure, Christian, there are no public comments today.
No, we didn't receive any signs in advance.
Okay. So for those watching who do join us, just know that you can sign up for public comment. Advanced sign up is permitted beginning at 9 a.m. the Thursday before the meeting until 5 p.m. the Monday before we meet. Individuals or groups interested in providing comments to the committee may sign up in one of three ways: by contacting the board office, visiting the board office, or emailing the board office. Of course, contacting and emailing are probably the easiest. And we do take up to five individuals who would like to provide comment, and each speaker gets 3 minutes. Our next meeting is February 21st from 4 to 6. Once again, February 21st from 4 to 6. We meet from 4 to 6 now. Just want to make sure everybody knows that. It's loud and clear. And we will be hearing about policy KIB, the sex offender registry, revisions to address the state law changes, and we will have compliance reports for policy BLA, BLB, and BLC, and this is procedures and appeals and hearings. So we look forward to seeing y'all on the 21st at 4, and we hope that you'll be able to join us. And thank you all so much for such a great discussion and such engaging, thoughtful comments that we had from everyone today, including my colleagues who are always so dynamic. Yeah, and I think that is it for the meeting. Oh, and thank you, Commissioner-elect Esposito, for joining us and chiming in the chat, using the tools the best way she could. I got you. If anybody else wants to say anything before we sign off, we are heading out.
Good night.
All righty. Good night, everyone.